So Road to UFC is going to be taking place this week. This is the fourth episode, the final episode of the episodes that are broadcasting the first round. And this is going to be on Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, broadcast on UFC Fight Pass. If you guys haven't seen them already, I have broken down every single fight on the first three episodes, and this is the fourth and final one. And in my opinion, I think that this is probably the weakest episode of the four. However, I do think that it does feature the two best fights in the Yuji Yannick Ephoeviga fight versus Dom Marfan. And then, of course, the final of last year's Road to UFC tournament, Ji Bin versus Zhu Kangxie, which did have to get rescheduled due to an injury to Zhu Kangxie, to my knowledge. I'm not going to waste too much time after that, because I do tend to make these videos quite long, because I do spend a lot of time breaking down the fights, because, you know, I spend a lot of time watching tape for these fights, so I don't know, maybe I'll just stretch them out for that reason. I don't do them intentionally, but please do subscribe to the channel. I really would appreciate it. Let's go. Rui Imura versus Nghiem Van Yi. This is a wrestler versus striker matchup. Honestly, out of all of the fighters that have had Shuto backgrounds, Rui Imura was actually the fighter I struggled to find tape on the most. I was able to watch quite a few highlight videos of him, like 90-second highlight videos that Shuto had posted on their YouTube channel, but I will be honest, wasn't really much more than that. And he fights the exact same way in every single one of them. He is a wrestler, and what he does is he will dive for a leg, and he will just drive that leg into the cage and then get the takedown from there. Quite often it actually ends up with him on his opponent's back, which is probably why he does have so many first round submission victories. I wasn't 100% sure what fights I was watching, but I definitely watched his fight against Ryo Yazawa. I definitely watched his loss against Kawamura here, and I watched another fight, a full fight, which I'm not sure which one it was, I'll be honest, and then aside from that, it was just a bunch of highlights, but I knew that it was him fighting because he fought the exact same way every time, and I do not believe that I saw a single strike be thrown by this guy in the entire time that I watched his fights. He genuinely just stands there and just dives for a leg as soon as he possibly can, kind of like how Man Shakira is going to constantly be looking for takedowns. Rui Imura does the exact same thing. Nghiem Van Yi is a very technical striker, and I do actually think he's quite a good striker. And I was able to see him fight where he's the one pressuring forward, especially in this more recent matchup against Felipe, and also against Lee Van Vu, I believe has how they pronounced his name on the commentary, where in this fight actually he was the one getting pressured backwards and he had to fight from the back foot. He's a very technical striker. I actually think he's a very good striker. He doesn't seem like the biggest guy for bantamweight, and he is going to have a size disadvantage in this matchup in particular. But I think the most sort of telling fights that I was able to watch from him was actually this loss to Felipe, because he lost to Felipe in the wrestling. He actually looked good on the feet. Felipe, his face was quite busted up at the end of the fight. He had a black eye, and it looked like a cut under his eye as well. But in the first two rounds especially, if Felipe got a takedown, Nghiem Van Yi looked like he had no idea how to get back up to his feet, which was a little bit disappointing, because it kind of just led to an easy win for Felipe. And Felipe was gassed, man, in the third and the fourth round. So maybe if Nghiem Van Yi's takedown defense was a little bit better, he could have maybe taken over the fight in the last couple of rounds, but it didn't matter. He lost, but he did get his win back. He got his belt back against him again. In this matchup, Felipe didn't actually shoot for a takedown, and Nghiem Van Yi just ended up knocking him out with pretty solid striking. I think it was a left hook that really set it up, and it was a nice combination after that. And I was able to watch his knockout win over Van Min Kwang as well, but kind of sort of same situation. He kind of controlled the cage in the middle and looked quite good. Now, the problem is I haven't been able to see all that much from Rui Imura, even though I did watch a bunch of highlights, as I did say. But just given the fact that he's a wrestler, given the fact that he's a grappler, and given the fact that I've seen Nghiem Van Yi get taken down and out-controlled by someone who I consider to be probably a worse grappler than Imura, I've got to go with Imura in this matchup. I'm going to pick him to win by submission. Now, Sang-Uk Kim versus Daichi Kamiya. This is a grappler versus grappler matchup, but with two different sort of styles. Sang-Uk Kim is a guy that's going to want to go out there and get takedowns and look for control, look for top control. And I do believe out of these two guys, he is definitely going to be the more comfortable fighter on the feet. Now, he's not the greatest striker in the world, but he does have pretty high volume output, and if he does need to strike, he has showcased that he can do it, because he did land 94 significant strikes against Rong Zhu, who is now in the UFC, and Rong Zhu just beat Cody Steele as well. That's a pretty massive win for him to have, and Kim, took down Rong Zhu twice and landed 90 strikes on him. Now, of course, Rong Zhu won the fight. He landed 125 strikes, I think, on Kim, but I don't think Daichi Kamiya would be throwing that much output, I can tell you that much. Daichi Kamiya wants the takedown. He wants to get the grappling going. He has a very good win recently where he won by twister over Raymat Quintana. If you guys don't know, Raymat Quintana has a win over one of the greatest fighters of all time, Blood Diamond, of course, who actually unfortunately has lost again since. But Raymat Quintana, a pretty decent striker, actually did catch Kamiya pretty early on in the matchup, and then from there, Kamiya got quite desperate for a takedown, and Quintana defended the takedown quite oddly. He tried to take the back of Kamiya on Kamiya's takedown attempt, and then ended up kind of slipping off, and Kamiya got his back, and then Quintana, trying to defend a rear naked choke, put himself in the twister. I don't really know too much about twisters because you don't see them that often, but the finish position that the twister ended up happening in, Quintana put himself in that position for Kamiya to get it. So I thought that was a little bit of an odd sort of finish. Maybe Quintana didn't really know how to defend the twister. I know I would have no idea. But yeah, he put himself in the twister and Kamiya got an awesome finish. And that's what Kamiya's good at doing. He's good at getting chokes. He's good at getting rear naked chokes, of course, and he's good at taking the back. He's a very opportunistic grappler. And I like that opportunistic grappler style against someone like Nghiem, because I think that Kamiya is going to be the much more active grappler when the fight gets down to the ground. I'm going with Kamiya by submission. And now we have Lawrence Louis fighting against Zhang Qinghe. This is an interesting fight because it's actually a bit of a mix-up of multiple different fights. The original matchup was actually going to be Ti Tao versus Chung Korean. Chung Korean, I believe, has a exclusive contract with Matrix Fight Night. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong. I'm definitely correct about that, it turns out. Anyway, Korean couldn't fight, so Lawrence Louis stepped in to fight Hai Tao Ti. And then Hai Tao Ti pulled out of the fight. And now we've got Zhang Qinghe. And Zhang Qinghe has a win over Ti Tao. And I was able to watch that on YouTube. I believe it's been reposted by a YouTube channel called Happy Elephant or something like that. You'll know you've seen it because I think I commented on the YouTube video. But anyway, in that matchup, Ti Tao was trying to take down Zhang the entire time. Zhang showed pretty good takedown defense and actually was able to land a lot of strikes in the clinch, a lot of knees in the clinch, and some punches in the clinch as well. And the stoppage was quite odd because he actually knocked out Ti Tao, and Ti Tao, after kind of being concussed, shot for a takedown, and the referee didn't stop the fight. So Zhang Qinghe, while celebrating, had to get back into the fight, and he finished Ti Tao pretty quickly after that. Aside from that, another fight I was able to watch from him was this matchup here between Savavek Kenzhaev, and that's also reposted on someone else's YouTube channel, but I was able to see that, and that was a very odd fight to watch because once again Kenzhaev was trying to get the takedown the whole time, and I think eventually Zhang Qinghe just kind of was like, alright, whatever, we can wrestle, shot a takedown, and then just smoked him with ground and pound after that. And then from there, being fully honest, I don't really know what I was watching because the language is in Mandarin, and if I can't recognize the Tapology user profile, I don't know who I'm watching. But Zhang Qinghe, he's a striker, and he's got pretty good takedown defense based on the fights that I was watching because his opponents couldn't take him down. Lawrence Louis is from CKB. He is from Hong Kong, but he lives and trains out of New Zealand, and he represents CKB and New Zealand, so of course I'm going to have a bit of bias on this one, but I was impressed by Louis. He's got a very technical striking. I do think that in times he's a little bit low volume, and I do think that low volume, or that lack to engage, actually lost him this matchup against Drilic, when I do strongly believe you can make a pretty good case for Lawrence Louis winning this fight, but I think the judges probably gave it to Drilic based on takedowns, even though I don't think Drilic did anything with them, but it is what it is. Lawrence Louis just was not throwing enough volume in this fight to have a good case to win the fight, I don't think, especially in the first two rounds anyway. But when Louis does let his hands go, he's good. He throws pretty good combinations. He's got solid kicks. He's got a good CKB style. He does kind of strike, in my opinion, like Kevin Doucet. You can take that as a compliment or not, however you want to take it, but that is how I see him striking. He looks like a Kevin Jusei kind of striker, except now 135 pounds. I do think out of these two guys, Zhang Qinghe's boxing was very impressive to me. His close quarters striking was good. He does throw a lot of knees. He does have very good clinch work as well. I think he's quite strong in that area. But I do think that Louis is going to be better from range. I'm not actually too sure how tall Louis is, but he does seem to be a relatively tall guy for bantamweight, and at least he was taller than most of his opponents anyway. And I do think that from range, Louis is going to be the better guy with the kicks, and I think that he does have better sort of just better striking from range. And I'm going to go with that in this matchup here. It's pretty hard to tell. Both guys are here on short notice, but I think that Louis can get it done using his rangy striking. And now we move up to lightweight. This is the I strongly believe the winner of this fight is going to win the tournament, whether that is Yuji Yannick Ephoeviga or Dolmar Fan, because I do think that both of these guys are probably the two better lightweights in the tournament. And I don't mean that out of disrespect to anyone else, obviously. I think that these two just really are that talented. Yuji Yannick, of course, is 11-0, and he's 11-0 over up and down competition. He's beaten some good fighters, and he's beaten some not some good fighters. The best win on his resume by far is this knockout win over Emmanuel Sanchez, and he was the first person to ever knock out Emmanuel Sanchez. And Emmanuel Sanchez recently fought against his name Kenneth Cross. He recently fought Kenneth Cross, who took him to a decision, and of course he fought for Bellator for a very long time and actually got a title shot at one point. I will admit, in this fight against Sanchez did look really old, but it was a good performance for Ephoeviga, especially when you consider that Yuji Yannick's style is not striking. In fact, I don't actually think he's a great striker. He doesn't have very good defense, and it's not really amazing to see because he isn't fighting the best guys, and he can get caught on the feet by these guys at times. But he does have, in my opinion, a pretty interesting sort of style, because when he closes the distance, he doesn't really throw hooks or knees, he throws elbows, and that's quite interesting to me. But especially in moments, and especially even against Sanchez, man, like Yuji Yannick would throw a jab, but it would be quite slow, and he'd stand in the pocket for too long. I don't love that about him. The striking is a bit of a weakness. However, that doesn't really matter too much because he's so good at grappling. Now, the wrestling itself isn't incredible. It mostly is getting takedowns up against the cage, and he's very good at doing that. But once he gets the fight down to the ground, he's very slippery. He's very good at getting the back of his opponents. He's very good at finding submissions over his opponents. And I know he's got a lot of finishes by knockout, but these aren't really against the best opponents, and I don't think that he is actually a great striker. Dolmar Fan comes from a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background where he did compete in shows, and you can tell that in his game. And his game has actually evolved over time, because at the start, he really was just kind of like a submission or bust sort of fighter, and then he's kind of become, especially recently against Tim Rogers and Tom Pratt, I would say, after this loss to Sal Killed, much more of a sort of positionally based sort of guy. He wants to get the takedown instead of just looking for an instant sub. I mean, he got an instant sub against Pratt, but Pratt gave it to him. But instead of just looking for an instant sub, he'll look for control, he'll look for ground and pound like he did against Rogers, and he'll work from there. And the thing is, actually, in both of these losses to Quillan Salkeld, who actually is potentially going to be a very top Australian prospect in the UFC, he got that somewhat controversial win over Jubilee by knockout in 19 seconds, and then he just beat up Gage Young for 15 minutes, which is pretty good. You know, and if he beats Ashmouz is a good fighter. Quillan Salkeld's a top prospect. He is a top prospect. He's not could be a top prospect. He is a top prospect. Those two losses to him aren't bad, and when you consider he actually was looking very good in the first round in both of these fights, but he just couldn't really deal with the pure grappling of Salkeld. That's what I worry about in this fight, because Dolmar Fan is now taking on a guy who I do believe can match him in the grappling. I think even if Dolmar Fan does get the takedowns, Yuji Yannick can look for reversals, he can look for the back. He is a very tricky guy. I do think that this fight is significantly closer than these Tapology odds are saying. As I said, I do strongly believe the winner of this fight actually wins the entire tournament. And I do honestly think that the UFC probably wants Yuji Yannick to win the entire tournament, you know, because if he does, he would be a 14-0 prospect from Japan. And I mean, I'm gonna state the obvious. You know, he doesn't really typically look like your most Japanese guy because he is obviously half Japanese, and I don't want to get this wrong, but he's half. I know this. I should know this, but he's half a country in Africa as well. I'm not going to be wrong about that. But Yuji Yannick, of course, he is half Japanese, and I think that he could be a very marketable fighter potentially for the UFC if he does get into the promotion. But I think that Yuji Yannick wins this fight. I do respect Omar Fan's skill set a lot, but I think that Yuji Yannick is going to be a little bit too much for him. And I think Yuji Yannick does get a submission, but the fight is so much closer than I think a lot of people will potentially lead you to believe. Now we have Zhibin taking on Zhu Kangjie, the Hypnotist, in the main event of this one here. This is the finals of last year's Road to UFC tournament. If you guys don't know, these guys were meant to fight on the UFC card, which was the finals where Qinghe Li, I believe, won, and other fighters did too. This is where Shi Ming got her knockout win as well. But anyway, yeah, Zhu Kangjie was injured, unfortunately. And I'll be honest, I was going to pick Zhibin in that matchup. I do believe that Zhibin's a very good fighter, and I honestly would like to see, no matter what really happens, both guys get signed to the promotion, because I think that Zhibin could actually make a bit of a splash in the UFC. However, I think Zhu Kangjie could make a bigger splash in the UFC, because I really am a believer in this guy's skill set, man. I really am. However, I think Zhibin should have been in the UFC before. I thought he got robbed on the Contender Series. I'll just put that out there right now. But anyway, Zhu Kangjie, this guy come out there, he absolutely smoked Tatsuya Ando, who is a very tricky striker with a very interesting style. And then Shin Haraguchi, a former freestyle wrestling world champion, he showed like really solid takedown defense in this matchup. Now, he did eventually kind of fall to Shin Haraguchi's style towards the end of the fight, but he spent the first 2 rounds showcasing incredible takedown defense. Like, I know Shin Haraguchi's undersized for even 145 pounds, and he is a very boring fighter to watch. Shin Haraguchi's a top talent in wrestling, and Zhu Kangjie, being a striker, was able to defend all of those takedowns, or most of those takedowns, obviously, and eventually ended up beating Shin Haraguchi in a damage-based decision. And Zhibin, I think, is actually a very talented grappler. I think that this guy can wrestle relatively well. I think he can grapple relatively well. But where he does get most of his wins is with striking. But the thing is, we just saw when Zhibin does not have to deal with a takedown threat. So when Zhu Kangjie does not need to deal with a takedown threat, he's solid. Like, he looked incredible against Tatsuya Ando, man. Like, he was calling out Ilya Tapuria in his interviews. Like, this guy's hilarious. I genuinely do believe that the winner of this fight would make a splash in the UFC, but I think out of the 2 guys that could go further in the promotion, I think Zhu Kangjie would actually be that guy. So kind of just based on the fact that I do believe that Zhu Kangjie, especially in a pure striking matchup, is the better striker, I have to side with the Hypnotist. However, I'm not too sure. Yeah, most people are picking Zhibin in this matchup, but I'm going to go with the Hypnotist. I'm going to go with Zhu Kangjie. Let me know what you think about this matchup in particular in the comments below, because I do think that this is a pretty good one. I do, as I said, think that Zhibin got robbed on the Contender Series in 2021. I think he's come back even stronger. He actually had a very good career as well and won championship too prior to that robbery against Olivier Mourad. And he's also got a pretty sick win over Anger Hans, who, you know, I did talk about in episode 3. I don't think he's that good, but he did knock him out in the first round, so that always means something. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one, which will probably be my LFA prediction video, which I'll do tomorrow.